The scene opens on a recreation of a discovery in the high Himalayas. We see the mummified, frost-caked corpse of a Western explorer from the early 20th century, perfectly preserved in the ice of a remote pass. His fingers are curled around a leather-bound journal. The narrator describes the shocking sensory details: the parchment of his skin, the impossible blue of his eyes frozen open, the smell of old leather and ice. His journal is open to the final entry, where he describes not a paradise, but an overwhelming sound, a low-frequency hum that vibrated his bones, and a blinding white light before his words devolve into an insane, terrified scrawl. This isn't a story about finding a utopia. It's about what happens when you search for a place that doesn't want to be found. And now, please stop the video and subscribe to our channel. To be able to keep making videos like this, we need to reach 1,000 subscribers as soon as possible. Thank you. That frozen body in the ice, the terrified scrawl in his journal. That madness didn't come from nowhere. To understand the end of that man's journey, we have to go back to the beginning of the story. 1,000 years back to the thin, cold air of 11th century Tibet. This is when a text arrived, smuggled out of the great monasteries of India. A document that would poison minds for centuries. We call it the Kalachakra Tantra, the Wheel of Time. But you shouldn't think of it as a holy book. You should think of it as a piece of forbidden intelligence, a coded prophecy that laid out the blueprint for the end of the world. Because buried in its complex verses isn't just a path to enlightenment. It's a war plan. It speaks of a final king, Rudra Chakran, who will sit on a throne in a hidden kingdom called Shambhala. And when the world outside has descended into a final, corrupt age, he will unleash an army, an unstoppable apocalyptic army, to ride out and cleanse the earth in a final battle. This wasn't a metaphor. The text gives numbers, lineages, and, most importantly, a detailed architecture of the kingdom itself. It describes a fortress mandala, a perfectly designed continent shaped like an 8-petaled lotus, surrounded by a ring of impenetrable snow-capped mountains. At its heart, the capital city, Kalapa, is described with impossible specifications, a stronghold of unimaginable power, built from jewels and precious metals. This wasn't a myth to inspire faith. It was a promise. A promise of a safe harbor from the apocalypse and the ultimate weapon to control its outcome. And once a map to absolute power exists, it's only a matter of time before someone tries to follow it. They wrote guidebooks, you see. Secret, terrifying guidebooks. And what those guides described was not a path to heaven, but a road paved through hell. That blueprint for a fortress at the end of the world. That promise of ultimate power. It's a seductive idea, but a blueprint is useless without a location. How do you actually get there? The answer lies in another set of documents. Documents that were, for centuries, passed down in secret from master to student, and for a very good reason. We're talking about literal guidebooks, the most famous of which was written in the 18th century by one of the most powerful men in Tibet, the Panchen Lama. It's called The Way to Shambhala, and it's not a book of prayer. It's a map, a step-by-step guide through a landscape of nightmares. It describes a path that begins by crossing a vast, featureless desert, but not of sand. It speaks of a plain of bleached white bones under a black Sunday. Survive that, and you enter a forest. But the trees don't have leaves. They have razors. The text is very specific. Leaves of black iron, honed to a razor's edge, that slice and flay the skin with every gust of wind. And then come the guardians. The book doesn't describe human patrols. It describes non-human entities, demonic sentinels with skin of stone and fiery eyes who hunt trespassers in the high passes. And here's where the story turns cold. For centuries, devout monks and believers, armed with these very descriptions, would walk into the vast, uncharted wilderness of the Himalayas and simply vanish. The official records say they were lost to the elements. But you have to wonder, did they succumb to the cold? Or did they find the forest of iron leaves? Did they meet the guardians described in the text? The easy answer is that it's all just an allegory, a metaphor for a journey of the soul. But that answer feels a little too simple, doesn't it? Especially when the first Westerners got their hands on these maps. They weren't monks seeking enlightenment. They were hunters. And they were about to find out what these mountains demand as payment. That payment was always rendered in flesh. Long before any organized expeditions, a first wave of Westerners, adventurers, mystics, and outcasts heard the whispers of Shambhala and were drawn to the Himalayas. They came alone or in small, ill-equipped groups, armed with little more than a rumor and a fanatic's conviction. Their private journals and desperate letters sent home are a catalog of human suffering. They don't speak of glorious discoveries. They speak of the horrifying, grinding reality of a body breaking down at the roof of the world. They describe the feeling of frostbite, that deceptive, creeping numbness in the fingers and toes that feels like warmth at first, right before the tissue crystallizes and dies, turning black and brittle. They write about snow blindness, the sensation of hot sand being scraped across their corneas until the world dissolves into a searing white agony. Then came the starvation. You can read the slow unraveling of their minds in their own handwriting, the entries growing more sparse and erratic as they describe boiling their leather boots for sustenance, their thoughts consumed by a single gnawing hunger. And with the physical decay came the paranoia. Isolated for months, they wrote of being watched, of seeing figures darting between the rocks at the edge of their vision, of a malevolent presence in the wind. Was it just altitude-induced psychosis? Or was it the guardians from the guidebooks finally making themselves known? These men weren't famous explorers. They were forgotten casualties, the first Westerners sacrificed to the myth. Their slow, agonizing deaths were a quiet prelude, proving that the legend had teeth long before the world was even paying attention. But their failures only made the prize seem more real, more valuable. And they attracted a new kind of hunter, one who wasn't just looking for a lost city, but for a key to changing humanity itself. The failures and deaths of those early hunters only deepened the mystery, making Shambhala an even greater prize. It attracted a new breed of seeker, one who wasn't just an adventurer, but a mystic armed with esoteric knowledge. His name was Nicholas Roerich, a Russian artist and occultist who launched a massive, well-funded expedition into Central Asia in 1925. This was not a desperate, solitary journey. It was a calculated search. Roerich believed he was guided by hidden masters, and his personal diaries, which we've re-examined, read less like a travelogue and more like a field report from another reality. And this is where the story takes a sharp turn away from frostbite and starvation into something far stranger. On August 5th, 1927, while camped in the Kukunor Mountains, Roerich and his entire expedition team witnessed something that has never been explained. I'm reading directly from his published diary. Altai Himalaya. We saw, in a direction from north to south, something big and shiny, reflecting the sun, like a huge oval moving at great speed. We saw how it disappeared in the intense blue sky. This isn't a second-hand rumor. It's a verifiable entry from a respected figure, corroborated by multiple witnesses. A massive, silent, high-speed oval in the sky in 1927. What did they see? Was it a hallucination? Or was it the advanced technology the Kalachakra Tantra had promised? This event changes everything. The search for Shambhala was no longer just a spiritual quest plagued by the limits of the human body. For the first time, there was documented, credible evidence that something real, something tangible, and something not of this world was protecting that sacred space. The secret was out, and it had attracted the attention of a power far more sinister than a lone mystic, a political machine that would twist the sacred prophecy of Shambhala into an excuse for global domination. That strange object in the sky over the Himalayas did more than just legitimize the quest for Nicholas Roerich. It put Shambhala on the world stage, and once the secret was out, it attracted the attention of a political machine fueled by occultism and a lust for power, the Nazi Party. The myth of a hidden kingdom, home to a spiritually and technologically advanced race of superhumans, was a perfect fit for their twisted ideology. For them, Shambhala wasn't a source of spiritual wisdom. It was the suspected point of origin for the pure Aryan race. In 1938, under the direct authority of Heinrich Himmler, the Nazi SS launched its own expedition to Tibet. Led by Ernst Schaefer, the mission of the Ahnenerbe, the Nazis' ancestral heritage division, was clear: to find the remnants of this supposed master race, to measure their skulls, and to claim Shambhala's power for the Third Reich. This is the ultimate, sickening corruption of the myth. A peaceful, spiritual concept, a metaphor for inner potential, was hijacked and weaponized to become a justification for racial purity and ultimately for genocide. They weren't looking for enlightenment. They were looking for a divine excuse to conquer the world and exterminate millions. They took a symbol of hope and twisted it into a swastika. This is no longer a story about mythical kingdoms or strange lights in the sky. This is where the legend crashes into the blood and steel of human history, becoming complicit in one of its greatest horrors. The question is no longer what lies hidden in the mountains. The question is what kind of madness lies hidden inside of us, that we can turn any belief, no matter how pure, into a weapon. That horrifying ambition, that need to twist a myth into a weapon, it's a kind of madness, but it's not the only kind. Because while the Nazis were chasing a fantasy, the earlier explorers were being consumed by a much more tangible monster. Not a guardian from a secret map, but a predator born from simple physics and biology. This is where the true horror of the story reveals itself, not in ancient texts or occult conspiracies, but in the clinical, brutal breakdown of the human brain under extreme pressure. Let's talk about what actually happens to you at 20,000 feet. The air thins. Your body is starved of oxygen. It's called hypoxia. The first thing to go isn't your strength, but your judgment. Then, as your brain begins to swell against the inside of your skull, a condition called high-altitude cerebral edema, your reality completely disintegrates. Those demons and fiery-eyed guardians in the diaries, we can now reinterpret them through a medical lens. They are textbook hypoxic hallucinations, the brain creating terrifying patterns out of oxygen-starved chaos. That constant, low-frequency hum the frozen explorer described, it wasn't the sound of a hidden city. It was likely severe tinnitus, the screaming of dying nerves in his own ears. The paranoia, the unshakable feeling of being watched, the irrational violence towards fellow climbers, all documented symptoms of personality disintegration caused by cerebral swelling. Think about it. The guardians from the texts who flay the skin from trespassers weren't real. But the frostbite that literally turns your skin black and causes it to peel away from the muscle and bone certainly is. The monster was never in the mountains. It was in their own blood, in their own skulls, an inescapable biological mechanism turning their minds into a torture chamber. The most disturbing detail is this: when your brain is dying, you don't know it's happening. You believe what you see. So, who's to say what was real to them? In the end, and in those final moments when their brains were shutting down, what was real to them? A demon's fiery eyes or the bursting of capillaries behind their own? It's the final, brutal question. But now it's time for the final answer. Because we have pursued this myth through prophecies, secret maps, and into the darkest corners of history and the human mind. We have documented the obsession, the suffering, and the madness. And now, the great unveiling. The truth is, there is no physical kingdom of Shambhala. There never was. It doesn't exist. Every map was a metaphor. Every guidebook was an allegory. The forests of razor-sharp leaves, the demonic guardians, the rivers of poison, they were never geographical locations. They were vivid, terrifying symbols for the obstacles of the inner soul: greed, hatred, and ignorance. The ultimate hidden record isn't a secret map locked in a monastery. It's the open consensus of legitimate scholars and the highest Tibetan Buddhist masters themselves, who have always maintained that Shambhala is a pure land, a state of heightened consciousness, a potential for enlightenment that exists within every single one of us. It's a journey you take through meditation, not across mountains. This is the core tragedy of the entire story. The frozen bodies, the years of agony, the psychological torment, the genocidal ideology, all of it, every last bit of suffering, was spent in the pursuit of a metaphor. They were trying to find a place on a map that was, all along, a map of the human mind. The stark reality is that the prize was never a physical throne of power, but an internal state of peace. And that leads to the most disturbing question of all. Why did so many people, for so long, choose to believe in the violent fantasy over the peaceful truth? That question, why we choose the violent fantasy over the peaceful truth, is the key. Because the great unveiling didn't end the myth. It only made it transform. The ghost of Shambhala haunts us to this day because the desire for a secret source of power, a hidden utopia that will rescue us from a world we can't control, is more potent now than ever before. After the horrors of the Second World War, the myth was laundered. It was stripped of its apocalyptic prophecy and repackaged for a new generation. It became a commercial product, the centerpiece of a booming New Age wellness industry selling enlightenment and exotic wisdom for a price. It was confused and blended with James Hilton's fictional paradise of Shangri-La, becoming a softer, more palatable fantasy. A spiritual spa resort rather than an apocalyptic fortress. But the old, darker currents never really went away. They just moved online. Today, the Ghost Kingdom thrives in the dark corners of the internet, fueling countless conspiracy theories. It's no longer just a spiritual goal. It's presented as a hidden city where ancient aliens guard advanced technology, or a secret base for a global cabal, or the future refuge for the chosen few after a societal collapse. The names change, but the structure of the obsession remains exactly the same. The myth didn't die, it just found new hosts. It proves that a dangerous idea can't be killed by facts alone, because it doesn't appeal to our logic. It appeals to our fear, our desperation, and our unending hope that there is a secret key, a hidden door that will solve everything. And that brings us to the final, haunting conclusion. So where does that leave us? After 1,000 years of searching, after all the bodies left frozen in the ice and the minds broken by obsession, what have we learned? The final, haunting reflection is this. The search for Shambhala was never about geography. It was never about a physical place you could find on a map. It was always about us. It was a mirror for the endless human hunger for a perfect world, for an escape from our own mortality, for a source of absolute power, and for a meaning to our suffering. The story proves, with brutal clarity, that the promise of a distant paradise can create a very real and immediate hell right here on Earth. The real hidden kingdom, the one that truly holds sway over our lives, isn't in some remote Himalayan valley. It's the vast, uncharted landscape of our own desires, our own hopes, and our terrifying capacity for obsession. That is the battlefield. That is the apocalyptic prophecy. And that is the final fortress we all must face. So, I leave you with this one final question. What is your Shambhala? And what are you willing to sacrifice to find it?